Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our Minyan prayers this evening. If you'd like to take your seats. Our prayers this evening will be taken from the Mishkan Tefillah Progressive Siddur, the Minyan booklet, which you will have received as you came in to the hall. And our service, which is part of our daily davening series as well, will include memorial prayers and memorial souvenir for Albert Bentata. So we begin our service on page 2. And please join me in reading this passage in the English. We are called unto life, destiny uncertain. Yet we offer thanks for what we know, for health and healing, for labor and repose, for renewal of beauty in earth and sky, for that blend of human holy which inspires compassion, and for hope, eternal promising light, for life, for health, for hope, for beautiful, bountiful blessing, all praise to the source of being. Baruch atah Adonai, mikor nefesh kol chai. Please rise for the call to prayer on page 4. Baruch hu et Adonai ha-mevorach.
Baruch Adonai ha-mevorach leolam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai ha-mevorach leolam va'ed. Please be seated as we continue together in the Hebrew on page 6. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'dvaro ma'ariv harabim b'chokhmah poteach she'arim ובדבונה משנה עתים ומחליף את הזמנים ומסדר את הכוכבים במשמרותיהם ברקיע כרצונו. בורא יום ולילה, גולל אור מפני חושך וחושך מפני אור, ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, ומבדיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב ערבים. And let's continue in the English on page 8. Everlasting love you offered your people Israel by teaching us Torah and mitzvot, laws and precepts. Therefore, eternal our God, when we lie down and when we rise up, we will meditate on your laws and your commandments. We will rejoice in your Torah forever. Day and night we will reflect on them, for they are our life and the length of our days. Never remove your love from us. Blessed are you, Eternal One, who loves your people Israel. Baruch atah Adonai, ohev amo Yisrael. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kevod Malchuto Leolam Va'ed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levavecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim Asher anochi mitzavacha hayom al levavecha, v'shinantam levanecha, v'dibarta bam, v'shiftecha b'beitecha, u'belechtecha b'derech, u'b'shachbecha u'b'kumecha, u'kshatam la'ot al yadecha, v'hayu l'totafot bein einecha, u'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'bish'arecha. We continue on page 13. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor, Daber el bnei Yisrael, v'amarta alehem, v'asu lahem tzitzit, al kanfei bigdeihem ledorotam, v'natnu al tzitzit hakanaf petil techelet, v'haya lachem letzitzit, uritem oto, uzchartem et kol mitzvot Adonai, v'asitem otam, v'lo taturu acharei levavachem, v'acharei einechem, v'asher atem zonim achareihem, leman tizkeru, v'asitem et kol mitzvotai, v'hitem kedoshim le'elohechem. Ani Adonai Elohechem, asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, lihiot lachem le'elohim. Ani Adonai Elohechem, Adonai Elohechem emet. And on page 15, let's read responsively. In a world torn by violence and pain, a world far from wholeness and peace, give us the courage to say, there is one God in heaven and earth. From bondage in Egypt we were delivered. At Sinai we bound ourselves to your way. Inspired by prophets and instructed by sages, time and again we overcame oppressive forces. Though our failings are many and our faults are great, it has been our glory to bear witness to our God, keeping alive in dark ages your vision of a world redeemed. Let us continue to work for the day when the nations will be at one and at peace. Then shall we rejoice as Israel did, singing on the shores of the sea.
Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi kamocha nedar ba'kodesh, nora teilot osef ele, malchutecha ra'u vanecha, bokeyam livnei Moshe u'Miriam, Zeli anu ve'amru Adonai yimloch leolam va'ed. ונאמר כי ודע אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק מימנו, ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל.
Amen.
Grant, O God, that we lie down in peace and raise us up, our sovereign, to life renewed. Spread over us the shelter of your peace. Guide us with your good counsel, for your name's sake be our help. Shield and shelter us beneath the shadow of your wings. Defend us against enemies, illness, war, famine, and sorrow. Distance us from wrongdoing. For you, God, watch over us and deliver us. For you, God, are gracious and merciful. God, are going and coming to life and to peace evermore. Baruch atah Adonai.
Baruch atah Adonai.
Shomer amo Yisrael la'ad. Blessed are you, Eternal One, Guardian of Israel. So we rise for the Chatzi Kaddish and the Amidah, beginning on page 20. As you'll note, we are using the high holiday melodies. There's a tradition that those who pass away at this time are considered tzaddikim. How appropriate to Albert. And so the melodies that you will hear are the melodies of the high holidays. יתגדל ויתגדש שמי רבה.
Amen.
ועלמא דיברה חירותי והמליך מלכותי. בחייכון וביום מכון ובחיי לכל בית ישראל בגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעלם ולעלמי עלמיה יתברך. יתברך וישתבח ויתבר ויתרומם ויתנשא ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי נקודשה בריחו לילה ולילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה תושבחתה ונחמתה תמירן מעלמא ואמרו אמן. אדוני שפתי תפתח ופי יגיד תהילתך. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו ואלוהי אבותינו ואמותינו אלוהי אברהם אלוהי יצחק ואלוהי יעקב אלוהי שרה אלוהי רבקה אלוהי רחל ואלוהי לאה האל הגדול הגיבור והנורא אל עליון גומל חסדים טובים וקונה הכל וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם למען שמו באהבה. זוכרנו לחיים מלך חפץ בחיים וכותבנו בספר החיים למענך אלוהים חיים. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן ברוך אתה אדוני מגן אברהם בעזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני מחיי מתים אתה רב להושיע. משיב הרוח ומרד הגשם מזריח השמש ומוריד הטל מכלכל חיים בחסד מחיי מתים ברחמים רבים סומך נופלים ורופא חולים ומתיר אסורים ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות ומירו מלך מלך ממית ומחיה ומצמיח ישוע. מי כמוך ברחמים זוכר יצוריו לחיים ברחמים ונאמנת להחיות מתים. ברוך אתה אדוני מחיי המתים. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקודשים בכל יום יעללוך סלה, ברוך אתה אדוני, המלך הקדוש. We continue with a moment of silent prayer and meditation, whether using the words of our prayer books in Hebrew or in English, or the words of our hearts. Please be seated. Within the midst of the Amidah, the words of Ritzei, one of Albert's favorite pieces of the liturgy, page 40.
Ritzei Adonai Eloheinu Be'amecha Yisrael U'tefilatam be'ahava tekabel U'tehila ratzon Tamid avodat Yisrael Yisrael Amecha El Karov Lachol Korav B'nei Avadecha L'chaneinu Shafar Ruacha Aleinu V'techezena Eneinu B'shuvecha l'Tzion Barachamim Baruch atah Adonai Hamachazir Shechinato Zion, Zion.
Ose shalom bimromav, uyase shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'imru ואמרו אמן. עושה שלום במרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. ואמרו אמן. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל. יעשה שלום, יעשה שלום, שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל.
Please turn to page 61 for the memorial prayers. We are assembled with our friends in the dark shadow that has fallen on their family. We raise our voices together in prayer to the source of life, asking for comfort and strength. We need light when gloom darkens our lives. To whom shall we look, if not to the Creator of light? We need strength and courage when pain and loss assail us. Where shall we find them, if not in the thought of the one who preserves all that is good from destruction? We are blessed if we have never yet passed through trials and bereavements. Some present here bear fresh wounds in their hearts, and therefore feel more keenly the kinship of sorrow. Others, whose days of mourning may be more remote, still recall the comfort that sympathy brought to their sorrowing hearts. Our rational minds know that all things pass. Emotionally, though, it is so hard to accept that all that lives must die. All that we prize is but lent to us, and the time comes when we must surrender it. We are all travelers on the same road that leads to the same end. And so it is that many of us here this evening were also at the funeral service this morning when we accompanied Albert Bentata on the final stage of his journey through life. We went as far along his road as we could to accompany him. But in the end, we have to say farewell. We have to say goodbye, au revoir, and we return. We return to follow our lives, to walk our roads. But we know that our lives are that much richer because of the life now ended. Because Albert was an extraordinary man and has left us with huge gifts, huge blessings, each one of us. Let's think of who Albert was. Well, first of all, he was a very warm and caring human being. He's someone who always made you feel warm when you interacted with him. He certainly did that with Sue and me when we came to this community 25 years ago. He was one of those who really made us feel welcome here and honored and valued. And in turn, we saw the extraordinary value and honor in this man. Because honor is another word that always comes to my mind when I think of Albert. He comes out of a background of honor. Born in Cairo and raised in Cairo, in a French-speaking environment, Jewish environment, a highly cultured environment. He's someone who always carried that sense of weight, of kavod, of honor with him. And he always treated others with that kind of honor too. And at the same time, he was actually quite mischievous, I think. He had a wicked sense of humor sometimes. He loved dad jokes, but he was also good at the other kinds of more sophisticated forms of humor too. And he always had a twinkle in his eye. He was someone who clearly loved life, and he loved it in strange manifestations, like many of you may not know, but he was a fencer. He began fencing at university, and he carried that on for many years over here too, and he taught fencing to his daughter's school. He was a photographer, quite a good photographer, and had a darkroom in his home. He was a chemist who liked to play, a little boy who liked to play with explosives, and became a chemist who liked to play with explosives. But as I learned, and as I mentioned at the funeral this morning, he was really good at this. In fact, he gave a lecture once, I love this story, at Balliol College in Oxford, of all places, and received a standing ovation at the end of it. He kind of blew up the hall, I guess. He was a man of tremendous integrity and fairness. And he really couldn't abide a lack of fairness, injustice, whether it be what he saw around him or in the people with whom he worked. But at the same time, he was just so open and welcoming to anyone who, with integrity, sought to learn about Judaism. And he probably taught more people, young and old, born Jewish or Jews by choice, in this community than anyone else has ever done. Though some people here are getting close in numbers. But I think he still leads the pack. And if you look at the honor board, which is back there, not the one facing us, but the one that we can't see right now, you'll find Albert's name, and yours too, Carol? Because you're side by side. You were always side by side. You'll find Albert and Carol's names listed on that board as Chatanim for Simchat Torah. That showed how Albert was honored, along with you, Carol, in this community. And you also received the remarkable honor, and it really is quite an achievement, of being made life members of Temple Beth Israel. I think there are very few life members of this community. And on top of that, Albert also received a Ner Tamid Award for all the work he did throughout the progressive movement here in Victoria and in Tasmania as well, for many years taking High Holy Day services at the synagogue in Hobart. He really was an extraordinary man in his, may I use the word Yiddishkeit, though he'd come up with some Sephardi expression that would be much better, I'm sure. And also in his love of people. And above all, his pride and his love in you. And that's why we're here tonight, in part to honor the memory of Albert Bentata, but also to share our sympathy with you, his family, because our loss is nothing compared to yours. And we know that as time goes on, your grief will become very heavy for you, like that honor that sits on you. But as wise people have often said, the depths of our grief is really a measure of the love that we felt for that person and that we continue to feel for those whom we love. I'd like to invite Albert's daughters, Yvette, Lillian, and Anita, to come up and share some words with us. And these are also on behalf of the grandchildren, and if they could, the great-grandchildren too. Oh, there's a... Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Before we start, I just want to say thank you to my daughter Jade for her beautiful rendition of Retse at a time when she's going through the same grief, that we are. And it's a lot to ask, and it was beautifully done. Thank you. Dad was originally named Gilbert, and that became Albert when he went to school. Juju was his mother's endearment, and Avraham was his Hebrew name. When Dad was 5 years old, a brother arrived, Claude. They fought a lot until Claudie grew to be bigger than him, and then Dad considered it wise to be less argumentative. They are his very words. Their relationship became very close. Our grandparents were very strict with them when they were young, but Dad loved and respected them and loved his childhood lifestyle. The family had a servant, so he had no chores. They lived in a large apartment in Cairo. Their apartment was within 10 minutes walking distance of many family members. One of the things that most saddened Dad in Australia was how distant everyone was geographically. When they first bought homes, Dad and Claudie chose blocks 20 minutes apart in walking distance, and later years 4 minutes apart by car. For entertainment in Cairo, they walked to Groppy for afternoon tea or to the cinema to watch cowboy films. He loved spy movies and reading Biggles as a boy. They also had family in the Mediterranean port of Alexandria, and Dad would go there for summer holidays, but he tells us that Claudie was not allowed to stay because he wouldn't eat his vegetables. Dad was always tasked with the job of organising the family library when he went to visit, a task that he loved and would require a lot of reading. Dad loved history and literature, and when it was time to specialise, he went into the sciences, as that was a more responsible, income-generating direction. But he would have liked to be a history teacher, and his childhood dream was to be a tap dancer.
Dad boarded with the Ferreur family in Marseille while at university and proudly told us that he had his first experience of parenting when their first child was born, changing nappies and feeding the little boy. Dad was home more often than the father. He also stayed in touch with his dear university friends, Jacqueline and Hilaire Cassé. Throughout his life, he considered them his best friends to the end.
As the anti-Semitism worsened in Egypt, the Bentata family decided to emigrate to Australia. Claudie and Dad departed first, leaving their parents and other family behind, as well as Dad's girlfriend Ninette and Claudie's love, Aviva. Dad said his first impressions of Australia were terrible. The first house had a toilet outside, and shops shutting down on Sunday was backward. But later he changed his mind and he said Australia was a fair society, a nice one to be in and less backward now. And there were so many good places to eat. He deeply felt the loss of his dear friends in France. He never wanted to go back to Egypt because he wanted to keep his good memories. But he did travel to Israel and France several times, and they were the places where he felt most at home. His parents, Nono and Nonna, arrived in Australia in 1957. They had been separated from their sons for 410 days. And the other special person who arrived at this time was Claudie's love and our much-loved aunt-to-be, Aviva.
Dad met our mother, Carmel, a Polish Holocaust survivor at a Jewish social group, and fell in love. She warned him about her war trauma childhood, but he believed that love would conquer all, and they got married at Bentley Progressive Synagogue in August 1959. They had 4 daughters, and each time the doctor said, "It's another girl, Mr. Bentata." Later he told us he wouldn't have wanted boys because he'd have to take them to the footy, which was never an interest of his.
The French word for memories is souvenir, and Dad often used the English word souvenirs instead of memories, and we'd like to share some of our memories of Dad, which are now souvenirs of a 50-plus year shared journey. Dad was very disciplined his whole life. Where exercise was concerned, he had a mini gym in his study. And we remember him on the rowing machine, using weights and a pull-up bar, and of course, the fencing. He was also a big walker, partly because he didn't drive. He travelled to ICI on the train, and we frequently walked to our cousins and grandparents for lunch or afternoon tea. Our nonna was the best cook. We remember her chocolate cake, and when I make it exactly as she showed me on the day that she showed me, down to the measuring glass, which I think is the last one in Australia. Her veal sofrito, her baklava, her tender, delicious vegetables. We loved the big combined family meals and celebrations, the Savadi Seders and Rosh Hashanah feasts, and playing with our cousins after the meal.
Dad had a serious car accident when we were young. We remember how the driver, who escaped without injury, came to tell us about it late one night. Dad was in surgery. Mum had us all hold hands in a circle with the driver and pray for Dad. He was all right, but boasted a scar under his eye that was visible for many years, and this experience contributed to his not wanting to drive.
He loved photography and had his own darkroom in our house and would take thousands of beautiful photos and movies of us all. We loved having family slide nights and watching how cute we all were as we grew up. It's thanks to Dad that we have a great visual record of our family life.
Dad wanted us to have a second language, so he spoke French to us and insisted that we speak French back. This was difficult because we were only really exposed to French on weekends and when Dad came home at night just to say goodnight, as Mum only spoke English to us. Dad's insistence on French kind of rebounded a bit because we fell into the habit of chatting more to Mum about our life's challenges as it was too difficult to express in French, and later he regretted how strict he had been about this. But he gave us a gift that we all appreciate in the ability to understand and speak, albeit awkwardly, a second language, and certainly an appreciation for it and for the culture.
When I moved to the country and then interstate, I made a point of speaking with Dad over Zoom in French. He was correcting our grammar to the end. A few days ago I thought, who am I going to speak French with now? As Judaism became more important to him, Dad learnt and taught Hebrew, first at Sunday school and then to B'nai Mitzvah and adult students. He was a good teacher, but I remember him throwing the chalk at me in Sunday school class one day for yawning.
He loved music. We remember him playing records of Nana Mouskouri and the Rabbi's Sons, Yaffa Yaconi, Edith Piaf, Charles Aznavour, Harry Belafonte, and Sentimental Journey on the radio on a Saturday night. I enjoyed sharing my appreciation of French movies, which are my favourite movies, and music with him, and sharing and introducing him to even some Ladino music that he didn't know of. But though he didn't like some of my tastes early on, like AC/DC.
Our parents purposely did not have a television when we were children, so music was very important in our lives. Dad sang all his life. He didn't think he could carry a tune, but he couldn't stop himself. He just did sing. And even during palliative care at the very end, he would turn sentences or names into song, and we think he held a pretty good tune. One time I was sitting with him, and he made this sound of pain. Ay, 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 ay. And then he went, ay, 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 I like you very much. Out comes a tune from Carmen Miranda. And then to Carol one time, he sang those special words, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot. Why is this room so bloody hot? So this was his strange sense of humour that was coming out, but it was so precious sharing some of these moments.
He called me his blondinette because I was the only blonde one.
He called me Olive for my black eyes.
He called me poulet, chicken, and we called him papa and puppy.
My interest was writing stories, and sometimes when I felt an urge to write but didn't have a specific idea, Dad would present the topic. The story had to begin in New York, end in Paris, someone had to die, and it had to include a pair of red shoes. I would rush away to write inspired, and this support from Dad was a factor in my becoming an author. I've done that twice. He had a high value on book learning and education. He would help us with our maths and science. We learnt later that he had also struggled with maths when he was young, until his mother engaged a tutor who inspired him.
Every birthday card we received from Dad would come with a philosophical quote or comment and a stick figure drawing. We treasured them. One year a card came with no drawing on the envelope. I handed it back, I said that wasn't okay, and I wanted a drawing, which he promptly did on the spot. And he continued this with his grandchildren.
We took family holidays with our parents and grandparents to Rosebud and Colorama. As our mother withdrew from the marriage, Dad took us on his own to places like the Grampians and Kangaroo Island, which we loved.
In 1981, our mother initiated separation after our youngest sister Suzanne's bat mitzvah. Our world came to pieces and Dad was devastated. They divorced in 1982 and he moved into a nearby street to remain close to us. Living alone challenged his cooking skills. His specialty was 3-minute eggs and boiling potatoes and zucchini.
And then he met Carol, the woman who was more truly his soulmate. He was so joyful about finding someone who shared similar values and beliefs, a love of Judaism and literature, and was able to meet him on an intellectual level as well as a spiritual one. They married at Bentley Progressive Synagogue in November 1983. And Dad's words to Carol at his 80th were, "Carol, my companion, my friend, my love. Without you, so many of my achievements would not have been possible. To have found a woman who shared my involvement in trying to understand and to study our texts, and who understands how to pass on words, pearls of wisdom without a long commentary, and also could no more resist buying lots of books than I can. What luck."
Around the time our parents were divorcing, we 3 eldest children were all moving out and living independent lives. Our sister Suzanne was still living at home. Dad and Suzanne took a trip to France together, which was one of the highlights of both of their lives. He was so excited when any of his children travelled to his favourite countries and met his family and friends. Liliane and I, at different times, travelled to France, and Suzanne and Yvette travelled to Israel.
It was such a blessing that Dad and Suzanne had this trip together, because a few short years later, Suzanne died after being hit by a car at age 24. He was heartbroken, as we all were.
Dad was very proud and delighted when he became a grandfather. When I told Dad about my first pregnancy, he rang daily to see how I was. That was Jessica. My daughter Jessica says, "I remember sitting with Nono and him teaching me about the internet and showing me this fun game, Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? I asked to play it many times with Nono and we would learn about different countries and the history of each country. Jade, Amber and I remember the way Nono spoke a prayer with such love. When we hear that prayer, I hear it in Nono's voice. I loved seeing him play with his great-grandchildren Ethan and Seth." My second daughter, Candace, says, "I will always cherish our time together, watching Disney movies and looking at photos from his travels. He would give me a vitamin C tablet when I came over, and I thought it was such a treat. He was always very gentle and playful with Zara, and I'm sad that he never had the chance to meet Ollie."
Jade remembers Nono teaching her Hebrew, backgammon, singing French songs together, having sleepovers, learning about family history, watching those Disney movies together, playing bocce and eating Milo on cereal. He was incredibly proud of her role in the synagogue, both on the board and especially as a cantor, and she especially treasures a memory of leading a Shabbat service with him. Jade found this quote in one of his sermons in the book that he wrote when speaking about the fear of growing old. "What grows never grows old." Amber remembers him putting them to bed at night time during their sleepovers, and Dad told them the story of the ship they travelled on to get to Australia, and he used to blow his lips against the side of a postcard or paper, and he did this when we were little too, and he would make the sound of the ship's horn, against it. It was so cute. And she remembers him listening to his little transistor radio in the mornings and eating cereal with juice. That one always did our heads in. Amber had a memorable Queensland trip with Dad and Carol, and one of their closest connections was when he prepared her for her bat mitzvah.
My son Jeremy says, I remember that he tried to teach me Hebrew at some stage and that I was, unfortunately, too impatient at the time to persist for very long. I remember being amazed and impressed at his fencing sword and the mystique of his past in a faraway place. But most of all, when I think of Nono, I remember warmth, a very loving man who valued family deeply. And although I often felt we didn't have much common ground to connect on, I could always count on a firm but loving hug on arrival and departure of his presence. On reflection, I feel a sadness that evaded me at the time of his departure. I would have liked very much to have had one last hug. One day, my son turned up at home with a Hebrew tattoo on his arm, and I discovered that Dad had colluded with him in this secret endeavour. Jeremy went to Israel and was deeply affected by his experience there, and my daughters, Leslie and Emma, came with me to France, and together we met his dearest friends, Jacqueline and Alain, and cousin Valdi. Leslie adds a memory about one of her last phone chats with her Nono. Nono asked if I had any boyfriends and kept saying something along the lines of, "Don't be afraid to play the field." It was definitely the most entertaining conversation I've ever had with him.
Dad considered his wealth to be his family, Judaism, his community, and his books. Having been expelled from Egypt, he valued freedom very highly, and each Pesach he would remind us of his personal exodus. It was Dad's life mission to be a teacher, and he passed on those traits and values to us. All three of us teach in one form or another, and we each value and prize freedom very highly. Dad left us the richer for valuing education, family, music and languages, and he also passed on his work ethic.
Fiddler on the Roof was a very significant movie for our family. In the movie and in our lives was a father with a high value on biblical learning and education. He was super proud when one of the family attained a diploma or added a degree to their qualifications, and a father challenged when some of his daughters married out. Like Tevye, our father was greatly challenged, but ultimately kept his heart open to us, even when we did not follow in his footsteps. Dad's great respect for Torah and Jewish rituals takes slightly different forms in us, but we all have a love of the divine, of the spiritual dimension of life. After his divorce, when his children took different paths, the Jewish community, you people, became Dad's extended family.
Dad disowned me in the mid-90s, and after Yom Kippur 1 year later, he sent me a letter asking if I would want to come back into his life. This deepened our connection and love for each other and our capacity to be with our differences, and I always treasured the capacity for him to be able to repair and reach out, and really showed to me what a man he is. A fridge magnet Dad kept says, "Families are like branches on a tree. We grow in different directions, yet our roots remain as one." During the years when Dad and Claude were busy with their families, they spoke at least once a week. Near the end of his life, Dad told us he only ever had 2 arguments with Claudie and couldn't remember what they were about. He was very pained by the loss of his brother in 2020.
Dad blessed us and our children and grandchildren every Shabbat, and we would like to finish by sharing that blessing with you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord turn his face unto you and give you peace.
Page 64, Psalm 23. Adonai roi lo echsar ירביתני, על מי מנוחות ינחלני, נפשי ישובב, ינחני במעגלי צדק, למען שמו. אדוני רואי, לא אחסר, גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא יירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך ומשענתך, המה המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן נגד צורריי. דשנת בשמן ראשי, כוסי רוויה, אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתי בבית אדוני לאורך ימים. Adonai is my shepherd. I shall not want. You make me lie down in green pastures. Lead me beside still waters. You restore my soul. You set me in circles of righteousness for the sake of your name. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me. You spread a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup runs over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of God forever. Please rise on page 68 for the memorial prayer. אל מלא רחמים שוכן במרומים, אמצעי מנוחה נכונה תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים את נשמת אברהם בן יששכר ומלכה אלברט בנטטה. שלח לעולמו בעל הרחמים, יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר Amen. Fully compassionate God on high, to Albert, who has entered eternity, grant clear and certain rest with you in the lofty heights of the sacred and pure, whose brightness shines like the very glow of heaven. Source of mercy, forever enfold him in the embrace of your wings. Secure his soul in eternity. O God, he is yours. May he rest in peace. And we say, Amen. Page 72, our concluding prayers. עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שהוא נוטה שמיים ועושה את הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינת זו בגבי מרומים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר, והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד. So we come to the words of Kaddish Yatom on page 84. The words of the Kaddish are in the vernacular of 3,000 years ago. They do not speak of Albert, they do not speak of grief, of sadness, or of loss, but rather simply recognize God's presence, even and perhaps especially at a time of loss. And so we join together with the mourners in these words of Kaddish Yatom, the mourners' Kaddish. Come up. Is that on?
Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, be'alma v'divrah chirotei, v'yamlich malchutei, v'chayachon uv'melchon uv'hayei tehol bet Yisrael, ba'gala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen.
יהי שמי רבה מבורך לעולם ולעלמיה.
Yitbarach v'yishbata v'yitbaha v'yittomam v'yitnaseh v'yithada v'yithale v'yithalal shemei kedusha
בריחו.
leila uleila bimbol v'chata v'shirata tushbachata v'nechmata da'amiran ba'alma v'imru
Amen.
Yeheser mabar min shmaya V'hayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, uyaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael ve'imru amen.
Amen. May the one who creates harmony on high bring peace to us, to all of Israel, and to all of humanity. And we say, Amen. Please be seated. And so as we conclude this Minyan, in a moment we'll leave. I'll invite the family to precede us into the lobby in just a moment, and then we will leave, and as we leave, we walk past them. Jewish tradition is that we try not to ask them, how are you? Because if there's ever a day not to be okay, this is it. Instead, our tradition is that we might wish you long life, almost 92. Or if Simchas in Yiddish, Basmachot in Hebrew, he would have preferred the Hebrew, which means may we meet in times of joy rather than in times of sadness, the kinds of times he would have wished to share. Or the old saying, Ad mea ve'esrim, which means may you live till 120, Moses' life cycle, but has changed by one letter. Today in Hebrew we say instead, Ad mea ke'esrim, it's one letter different and it means may you live till 100 as if you were 20. I think he preferred that and would have wanted to live accordingly. So as you leave, I invite you not to ask, how are you, but rather share a memory. Something which might begin with, I remember when. There's nothing more heartwarming than those memories. Nothing more profoundly meaningful. So I'll invite everyone to stay where you are while the family precedes us into the lobby. And we can greet them there. I wish you all long life, and we should truly meet of simchas in times of joy rather than in times of sadness.